Welcome back to Danny Rants. I don't reckon I've been this excited for a long time. Across from me, I have a DJ's, a rave legend, a guy who needs no introduction. If you know him, and you're going to want to hear this story, Mr. Jason Midro. How are you, Jace?
Very well, thank you.
I'm so stoked to have you, Danny, as I've been telling you for the last 15 minutes before we started.
Pretty exciting to be here. Thanks, Danny.
I want to wind it all the way back, right? Because people are going to want to know the story from the beginning to now, right?
Mm-hmm.
When and how do you begin DJing? When does your love of music begin?
Well, I've sort of been into music all my life. Played the piano for 10 years, the flute, a lot of instruments throughout school. Did work experience at Central Station Records in 1986 in year 10 and ended up working there and was working there on Friday nights in the disco department in the City Square and then Sundays at Chapel Street, Sunday afternoon. So that was sort of in the music industry. Then it wasn't until I left school and I was enrolled at a flight training. I wanted to be a pilot as well, and I was working at the Hilton Hotel, and they sort of wanted me to do management, so they put me at William Angliss, and then I got offered an opportunity to do some music journalism with Inpress Magazine, and this was right when it was all just rock and roll, like early 90s, and so I started reviewing CDs with them, which grew, and then started doing cover stories for big artists like Moby and CJ Boland, Carl Cox, all those sort of things. And it really, the whole dance thing was just exploding at that particular point in time. And I was also doing a column called Fast Forward the Future. I was getting the latest 12-inch vinyls and everything coming in through MDMS, through Colin Daniels, and doing reviews of those as well. And over a period of time, basically, as I said, it really grew and was pretty much, we implemented the whole Zebra thing, the dance lift out. Beat followed that not long after. So yeah, I was the main journalist there for like four or 5 years, and did a column called the Rave soon as well, which was just all the sort of underground rave stuff, which events were coming up. So that was sort of how I got into it, and obviously reviewing the records. I had the records, and I was hanging around with Will and Rich and Jason, all those guys, and Jeff, Tyler, and all them. So yeah, I wanted to sort of get into DJing as well. And there's one recovery party we had, and I sort of had to go on the decks, and I just like the first mix I tried to do, I actually just got, and so did anyone hear that? No one heard it, which is sort of like, it wasn't a mistake. I thought it was something that I have a flair for doing. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist in a way where if I can't nail something straight away or don't get it, I just don't like it. But this was something that I could do. So then I bought the decks and started DJing as well. And it took a lot of years before I could get gigs. There was a lot of competition back then, and still is a lot of competition really. But yeah, eventually started getting work, and came to a point where I had to decide between which career to go. Like there was the hospitality, which a lot of work, flying, which I love, and then there was this dance thing, and I went with the dance thing, I went with my gut, and I'm sort of glad I did because it just exploded, and it was the right decision for me. So yeah, that's sort of when it sort of started.
See, the whole pilot thing you continued to do. You were going down that.
No, I didn't. I had to choose one thing. Like the music became full time. Yeah, like we were doing. Frank, who does Rainbow Serpent, who was like one of my first partners with Sound of Now, he sort of approached me at one stage and said, "Listen, I want to start doing some events. Do you want to get on board?" And I said, "Yeah, well, that's it." So found the only real way to get gigs at this stage was do your own events, and it's still sort of a lot like that. So yeah, so I started doing my own events, and yeah.
Most of the big guys start that way.
Yeah.
Going back to the journalism stuff, you obviously, I'm assuming, like most people that worked in that journalism space back then in Impress, which is obviously a very powerful magazine for all cultures, not just the dance culture. How were you able to do that? Like, how did you figure out how to become a journalist, and how did you actually get that job?
Well, it's funny. Frank Barresso, a friend of mine, personal friend who has worked at Warner's, he offered me the position, and I sort of got in pretty good with Impress. I was always up on time, but the funny, Rowena, the editor, she was pulling me up on my on my reviews of the music in particular, swirling chords and all these, just lots of adjectives, and she kept asking me to tone it down because it was just a bit out there, and I was like, the column was Fast Forward the Future. It's time to accept it. And it was all about what was coming with the music and all, and it's difficult to describe techno and a lot of the music without words in any other ways except use lots of adjectives and be quite descriptive. And it wasn't until actually David Carboni from FSOM one day approached me and said, "Listen, mate, I've never ever seen techno music described that way before, and right, you've got it right." So that just sort of gave me that little bit of confidence that I needed to. So I was doing the right thing, and so yeah, just kept going down that path. And like I said, it just exploded. It just exploded. So CJ Boland, Derek May, Urban Cookie Collective, all the big acts that were coming out. I was doing all the cover stories for that. So it was really good in lots of ways for me to get to know the people, be in the industry. Also doing the rave scene column. A lot of there was the flyers and all that sort of advertising, but still people needed somewhere to go to reference what was on that particular week. And then I do the reviews of the events afterwards. So it was I became sort of a little bit, right in the right place for where I needed to be to do what I wanted to do.
Yeah, for sure. And how important do you reckon, like, and I obviously know the answer, but I'd love for people to hear this. How important do you think that those columns were for the actual original rave scene, like showcasing these artists and also talking about these raves and the scene that was actually going on? How important do you think that was to the industry?
Look, really important, I think. And the thing was, back then, it was all most of it was handwritten or on computer. There was no AI or anything like that, so it was difficult to do. So it took a lot of time to do and to do it right. Um, but yeah, I think for because it was such an underground scene, it wasn't seen anywhere. And for it to come out on, through Impress, there was 25,000 copies distributed each week. I did a couple of runs in the morning just so when they all went, but and they all went really, really quick. So people were on the street press. It became, they would all pretty much Impress. All the magazines would be gone within a day or so. So people were picking them up and reading them. So it was pretty important. And especially at that particular point in time, like I said, everything in Australia and Melbourne was just rock and roll, and there was this massive dance explosion. And where did people find out about it? So it became pretty important. Yeah.
Was there a moment in those early days before you got involved with Impress? You got involved with Impress that you fell in love with dance music that you can tell us about?
Look, definitely. My first introduction, I think it was maybe Cup Eve in 1991. I think it was what was the first part? Chemistry at the Palace. And I remember rocking up there, and I walked in, and I was actually scared shitless. It was just this noisy sound. I'm like, what the fuck is this, man? And I could sort of see this certain DJ over there, but I couldn't work out what was going on. And I spent the majority of the night with my friend up on the hill, sort of trying to get the courage to go back in there. But after that, it was just like, wow. And then there was the biology parties that the Mud people were doing. And of course, Richie was doing his hardware stuff. So the events back then were still pretty good. So yeah, I just loved it, and loved the whole dancing thing as well. And I spent many hours on the dance floor, doing the shuffle thing. Way back in the day, before the Melbourne Shuffle, they say that they developed it throughout this particular point in time. But originally, it came from the UK. Actually, probably goes back to the 20s, to like the Charleston or the Cha-Cha, one of those particular dances. But it was developed in London, and I remember quite a few of us with Richie and Jason. We'd just go out and just doing all these sort of trippy sort of dance moves, and we'd go out every night of the week to Fad or Sanity or wherever it was we could go where there was just music and just dance, and people were just looking at us like we were freaks with our Reebok pumps on and doing this shuffle thing and our bum bags and our stussy stuff. Just like we were like very different back then, but it just became the culture, and yeah. Where we were going with that?
So you talked about the Melbourne sound stuff, right? You're talking about the history of it, and you said that it come from London originally. What's your sort of take on that Melbourne Shuffle and how it came into Melbourne?
Well, I was through Impress. I got actually approached from a guy called Sean Nayland in Sydney who wanted to do some touring stuff, and the first act we brought out was Joe Beltram and the Shaman, and I looked after Joey. So I was going to handle the more underground sort of artists that just bringing out, and he had a couple of other guys looking after the bit more commercial ones. The second one we did was for the Rat Party. It was the Experience Tour. So Prodigy. First time they came to Australia, I was tour manager for the Prodigy for 2 weeks. So I spent 2 weeks with these guys and got to know them really, really well. Of course, they were dancing, pretty full on. So that was, you could really see where the roots were coming from as well. And they were one of the big acts that really pushed that dance and that particular type of dancing. I think in the club scenes throughout the 80s, there was the normal dancing, but then there was sort of the acid house came out, and there was the jack your body, the jacking, and then there was sort of like the snap and the power and all those sort of things, where it was a bit sort of slower. So we sort of started moving a bit more and sort of sliding our feet a bit more. And as the music got faster over the years, which it did, we sort of accelerated and started doing more movements in the beat, and it became the shuffle. It was developed over a lot of years. And of course, the Melbourne people are renowned for their dancing, and you can recognise them anywhere across the globe. Usually by the powder on the floor. If it's
the smell of talcum powder when you walk in a club.
At base initially, like the amount of powder that was on all the equipment and everywhere was just unbelievable. It was like being in an outdoor dust fest.
We were sort of like after that generation, and I remember their owners telling us that you used to have that extra cleaning fee to clean up all the talcum powder.
Well, that's it. Quite a few of the venues were just a bit against it, but I was lucky because I started doing things at CBD Nightclub with Mark DiMaggio. Mark was fantastic. He was one of the first club owners who was not straight down the line. And he gave us freedom to do what we wanted to do. He understood what we wanted to do and let us get away with a lot. And that was, where I guess, the it was at a point in time when maybe 1998 was at the end of that golden rave era. There was so many underground rave parties. Like the underground dance music scene in Melbourne was just insane, man. Like it was insane.
And I know you're about to lead into Base Station. I'm going to pull you back because that's a
Sure,
major part of this whole interview,
sure.
right? And people really want to hear it. So you were a punter originally. You're talking 91, working at Impress. You're going to these raves, these illegal raves, the lot. Can you run me through some of your favorite parties when you were a punter?
Sure, definitely. Look, one of the very early Evie pictures it was at one of the warehouses in Footscray. It was insane. These guys had lasers set up the front and they had mirrors all throughout the room. It was just bouncing everywhere and it was just laser rain. And I think Nick Fish played at that, a bell, and it was just the way that they were doing these events was insane. Richard and Heidi from Mud were just so innovative in what they were doing with the decor and everything and voodoo and Phil. It was just they were such beautiful events. They put so much time and effort into it. And literally walk into an empty vacant shell, set it up, maybe a day or two before because they put a lot of effort in, and then by the next day it'll all be gone. And it was such a neat operation. And by the time back then, if the police turned up or anyone turned up, it was sort of like that's sort of what is this? They didn't really understand it, and it was also passive and calm. And by the time they'd sort of realised or whatever, it was all said and done and over. And that's how the events went, and they went for a lot of years like that, until the government started catching on to it. I think at that point in time, Victoria was the arts capital of the world, just about, and it was music and everything orientated, which was just amazing. And over a period of 5 or 6 or 7, 8 years, it got completely shut down, and the councils were trying to shut us down with restrictions and permits and all that sort of thing. So we had to legitimise ourselves. Fire restrictions, everything, and we were doing that. And in the end, they were getting us with the EPA thing, and they did everything to shut us down. And eventually, they did. And one of the big, the Evie pictures at the Altona Sports Centre, they were just amazing events as well. There was 2 or 3 there, and the last one that was there was one of the May New Year, and that was just amazing. But I knew at that particular point in time that was the end. There was no more events. We couldn't do warehouse parties, and they'd really shut us down. And that's when I knew we had to move into the clubs. And um, it was a hard move to do because we had that the warehouse parties were just so much freedom. But like I said, Mark DiMaggio was fantastic. He let us come in on the day before. We made every single wall, had banners, everything hanging from the roof. It was just an absolute. The whole place was transformed. Every level you went to and everything. So I really tried to keep that energy and that vibe of the warehouse parties because they were really special. As in, bang, it was like an instant event.
Yeah,
Out
it's
of
a cool
nowhere.
thing to talk on too, right? Like that kind of transition into those warehouse parties and into the nightclub, because the nightclub culture became bigger. Like it was humongous, right? It became almost in a way like a commercial juggernaut. But in those early days when you were in those raves too, like why do you think the government cracked down? Was it to do with the drugs, or was it to do with the sounds, or
Well,
did they not understand how free? Like what's your take
Look,
on that?
a lot of it was to do with the Nightclub Owners Association, I think. There was the street, there was also the radio stations that were going on as well. The rave scene was having such a massive impact. Friday night we'd go to Express Chasers, which was like sort of ravey. And I think the clubs that had a night which was an underground night as well as their smaller commercial nights tended to work and continue to maintain credibility and customers through the door. Chasers shut down Express, and I think it did a lot of damage to them, and sort of the ravers moved on. And but like I said, it got to a point in time where there was a period of time there from the early 90s where these parties started becoming a lot bigger than the clubs. And I think the clubs were battling to put a stop to it, which they succeeded in. And then also when the explosion of Street FM and Kiss FM and all those particular ones as well, it was also when we were on air, like we were affecting the ratings and all that of your Triple M's and all those bigger stations and that sort of thing. So that was sort of a bit against the whole culture as well. I was with Kiss for 10 years initially. And then when we went for that final license at the end, we were jammed by the ABA, and it was just so disappointing because we put in so much effort, and it was just when you had the music in all the cars across Melbourne and everyone was tuned to the same vibe, there was just this energy in the air throughout Melbourne, and the dance culture was just the biggest thing. And everyone was going to the parties and the events, and it was a really cool vibe. And I just remember when one time I sort of was on air and I said, if you're out there, honk your horns, and just the whole of Melbourne just went. You could just hear it, like the amount of people that you could actually connect. And I think I was doing Saturday nights at Kiss, and at one stage it was averaging about 100,000 listeners on, for the show, and it's a lot of listeners, and it's a lot of people that you can reach. So the music was just spreading, and the culture was just becoming massive. And of course, they were not big alcohol drinkers, and I think Melbourne was the nightclub capital of the world at in the sort of late 80s, I think early 90s. Chasers itself was actually the #1 bar revenue taker across the globe. So they made a lot of money on the bar, and that was their thing. And when that started, not happening, they really got a bit worried. And so there's quite a few factors that did do that. And also the events were getting bigger, and there was a bit of dodgy shit going on at the events. And by this stage, it was like, well, hold on. There's certain people within the governments and the communities that knew what was going on at these events, and there were certain people in those particular same departments who were letting it go ahead, getting a take or whatever it was that was going on. Which was a little bit dodgy back then, but it got to a point where they couldn't do it anymore, and that's, like I said, that's when we had to go into the clubs. So from like '98 sort of up to sort of mid early 2000s, it was difficult to do events in venues. You really had to be large scale, professional. Richie still did his hardwares and those sort of things. So there was, and Mark James was doing stuff as well. So it was the bigger dudes that were doing it. So I just kept staying underground. I wanted to stay underground. The dress code on the door was dressed down, like it always was, a base, just casual, and the attitude reflected the people, myself, and just what I wanted it to be. And it was all about, more than anything, the non-violence factor as well. The alcohol was just breeding violence, and I hated it. I saw some really ugly things in the early days at like Checkpoint Charlie and all of these places I used to go to. Just the bouncers are just out of fucking control, mate. I've always had an issue with bouncers, and just the violence factor, and just they go too far, and people fighting in clubs, and that whole attitude really changed. It was like, if you bump into someone, over the periods of time, it wasn't, hey, fuckhead. It was like, hey, man, sorry. That little thing was a big reason why the rave culture and everything became such a massive thing. It was more really peace orientated and non-violent, and like I said, and for that to exist, the elimination of alcohol was nearly was important. And so
that's the best take. Like you've just blown my mind off with that, but it's so true, right? Like alcohol fuels violence. It does. I've worked in the industry for 20 years myself, and there's no doubt people say to me, "What's the worst drug?" I'm like, "It's alcohol." Because like without you talk about the other drugs, and my platform's a big pace where I talk about. I'm honest, and the reality of it is dealing with someone who's high on ecstasy is very fucking easy. Like they're more likely to give you a hug than they are to punch you, right? So, and everyone knows that. Everyone who's worked in the industry forever has known that. But the reason why people kind of put a stop to it, or probably give it a bad name, is because it affects alcohol sales. And without alcohol sales, these companies and these businesses and these venues cannot actually operate. So it's always been this constant war, especially in Melbourne. And I've never really thought about it till you brought it up, where it's alcohol versus the underground drug scene. And it's been over and over again, from your scene into the scenes that are still continuing today. Like there's obviously illegal raves all throughout Melbourne currently still. And, always has been. And then our scene, it's always been drugs versus alcohol. And because of that, you talked about dodgy stuff. There was a period of time where there was a lot of venue owners who were selling drugs, right? Because it was the only way for them to make money. And Melbourne is very unique in a way. It's a melting pot of culture, and it has. And without those drugs and those dodginess and the greatness and the amazing times and everything else, we don't get the art that we continue to make, from the shuffle to the sounds to everything that grows, right? So that wrap up you gave is a fucking very much a biblical almost version of why and how we've kind of battled with it. You then go into the nightclubs, you discuss that. It went from the rave culture where it was exploding, went from doing 300 people to 5,000, 6,000 people at some of these events. You go back into the nightclubs, or some of the bigger promoters go into spaces like Sydney Mine Music Bowl, for argument's sake, where they are traditionally, actual licensed venues. Going back into the clubs, and the club became the underground, you started Base Station. So can you run me through how the beginning of Base Station started?
Sure. But just before I do that, I just want to touch on with that whole drug thing. There was that with death in Sydney. I won't say her name, but at the Happy Valley party, where there was the girl that overdosed on ecstasy, and they sensationalized it, and it was an ecstasy death. Finally, they had something, and some means to demonize or make the drug seem so bad, and they kept bringing that up and up and up. But what they were failing to recognize, and it's still true today statistically, I think it's up to 12 or even 20 average people are dying a week in Australia from alcohol related overdoses or that sort of thing. And they sort of let that slide because obviously they're, taking a cut of it and making money out of it. So that's another reason why the government's also tried to outlaw us and get rid of the whole drug thing, apart from it being illegal. But I think going back to civilizations, I think we're the only civilization in the history of man, or depends how far back you go, if you want to believe in Darwinism or evolution or the real history, which I think we're uncovering now that there's been humans here a long time,
Yes.
and other things here. I think we're the only this is the only culture where it's been illegal to take substances. in the past, there was the corroborees or your ancient tribal things where they all, medicine men had peyote, whatever it was that they were taking. It was their way to touch, base with the spirit world and in themselves and that spiritual element. And they've tried to stop that with this culture and this where we are now. But they did. I mean, it's just out of control for a while, and they've put a cap on it for a bit, but still, people are still.
Yeah, but it's never worked. Like that's a really good thing. It's almost like you talk about the war on drugs in America with Nixon. We've had a war on drugs in Melbourne against the rave culture since the 90s. It still continues to this day. Nothing's changed. Like the same laws and regulations that were in the 90s still exist right now. Even up to like pill testing is the newest thing that they've allowed to open up, but that's only changed in 30 years. But the difference is in the last 30 years, people have continued to take drugs at raves in Melbourne, in the underground, and also in nightclubs. That has never changed. And then the reality of it is alcohol has fueled the majority of the violence. They've tried to demonize that the drugs have, but the reality of that is obviously there's a whole factor of, I'm not going to underplay, like when it comes to drugs, there's mental health problems, there's addiction, there's all that sort of shit. But alcohol is definitely no hero. And that's how it's been painted. And the reality of it is that it's a government-led fear campaign. Like they're fear mongering in a sense. And, I don't think anybody who works in our scene or the dance scene, we don't have that sort of take. We don't have a black and white take like the government does or the police do. Ours is great because I think every single one of us who's worked in this space, we've seen how drugs can empower a situation and community and music and experience, but we've also seen how it can ruin people's lives, right? So we kind of are the middlemen or, the medicine men in the sense that see the good and the bad of it. And the fact that some are good and some are bad is just complete and utter bullshit. It doesn't exist.
Well, one of the things I found with the techno music in particular as well is like we're at the big events and it's just lights and sound. You couldn't really talk to people on the dance floor because it was so loud. So you learned to communicate in different ways. And remember doing an interview with Derek May, and we were just it was about the communication thing. And as I started to travel, I could go anywhere around the world, and I could say something, and they'd understand where I was coming from, rather than having to speak the words. So it just broke down the communication barriers, and I think that's a lot of the issues that have always been on the planet and with humanity and the clubs and all those sort of things was just basic communication, people not understanding what other people are saying, and eliminate the words and put those sounds in there and just you express yourself through that sort of thing like that. It became a different way of communication, and like I said, across the globe, and with the technology being developing, the mobile phones coming in and all that sort of stuff, and of course the digital side of it and being involved with music, and that's sort of how the techno thing sort of exploded. It just opened the realms of the world and just communication, and it's continued. And I think the psytrance is one of the particular most universal sounds, in particular, like just across the globe. It's continued to do that, and it's a bit more out there. But yeah, look, I think communication and connectiveness, and I just through the whole ecstasy thing, it was it just calmed down the planet, mate. It just calmed down fucking everyone, and just it's like, oh, hold it, I'm not going to say fuck off. I mean, if you bump into him, it's like, sorry, mate, it's all right. It changed the whole mindset. And I think our generation, it was a revolution to a degree where we really changed the mindset, and affected the whole world. And it was a really positive thing. So, from that particular aspect, I don't really see much negativity out of the drugs. And like I said, there wasn't, I saw a few overdoses, but as far as, people dying from it, it was very rare occurrences. It's not sensationalizing and saying it's a good thing, but like there was, but overall, just for what it did for humanity, the planet, the whole connection between nations and that, it just really eliminated any what's the word for it?
Negativity.
Well, definitely negativity and more. Oh God, what's the word for it? I can't think of the word.
Yeah, it's one of those things too, like which I find super interesting now, right? So as I've created this platform, I'm meeting ravers who are 60 down to 18, and they'll come to me and they're honest, right? So they'll say to me like, I had this amazing experience on ecstasy and I met these people in Berlin or whatever. It's this worldwide universal thing. But for whatever reason, this amazing thing that brings people together and has been such an integral part of people's sort of growth, like as you said before, people who have experienced this, they normally traditionally become great people, right? And then they have to kind of whisper it to me like, oh yeah, I used to do ecstasy at the Werribee Sports Center. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, why is that a secret? Like, why do you have to, because I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to do this. 30 years on, it's still demonized when I think you look back at it and it was I think most people who experienced it, they look back on it and my platform kind of almost shows that people care. Yeah. And so they want to watch back. They want to relive those moments because they weren't these horrible moments that we were told we had to betray them or we had to hide them or keep them secret. And it's a very, very interesting talking point. I'm sure we could go on about it for fucking days because my biggest thing has always been like, well, you got to tell the truth of both sides, right? So drugs can be great, drugs can be awful, and we got to tell both sides, right?
Yep.
So going into a secondary thing, other than this, when you first started to DJ, was it when you became a pro and started Base Station, or was it prior to that?
Prior to that, for sure. Yeah. Like I said, I had a passion for it from the word go. I got my Technics 400s, and I was actually the first person in Australia to buy a Pioneer 500, like with the 3-channel things. I mean, we were so fortunate to have people like Willie Tell. I mean, Willie Tell was just fucking ahead of his time, you know. And we had all these internationals coming out and everything, but Willie was just amazing. And I just watched him everywhere I went and just learnt off him. Yeah, and just seeing what you know what he could do, and but Willie was just ahead. You know, we were talking about him before. He was ahead of his time. Willie was seriously 5-10 years ahead of his time, and it got to a point where technology and the things that he wanted to do just couldn't keep up with him. And I think that's part of why he left. But then with the Pioneer that brought out the 500 with the 3 EQs on each channel and that, and I would spend 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, just mixing just continuously, and all us early DJs that were like that, we'd spend all our money at Central Station Records or wherever it was on records. We wouldn't eat and we'd just mix. That's all we did. And I don't see that dedication that much these days, where people are just absolutely obsessed with it. But we're using vinyl. It's a different medium. It's a lot harder to master. There's a lot more to it. If you wanted to be a DJ back then, you really had to fucking work and study and at it and practice like continuously, because it was just, holding a mix on vinyl is never a certainty. You've always got to be aware of what's going to go on with it, because it shifts. Whereas these days it's a lot easier to do. So, but yeah, I was just into it, and I loved it, and I loved. I'm actually really quite an introverted person and quite quiet, but that was for me a release, and it gives me a chance to sort of express myself on stage, and so I became addicted to it to a degree. It allowed me to be someone who I wasn't always often, and people would say quite often think, oh, I'm a snob or whatever this, but I'm just quiet, you know what I mean? And I know general chit chat and that sort of thing just doesn't stimulate my brain. If you trigger me with a topic that interests me, apart from myself, I'll get into it, and then you'll see me, talk and that sort of thing. But like I said, music, and just I think just through all the Inpress stuff as well, and speaking to all these international artists and just finding out what's going across the globe and the movement, it was just something that I knew I wanted to be part of. And it wasn't until I guess Mum and all these people was like, oh, what are you doing? We private school education, you're going and doing this, that. And I'm like, I just got this vision for it. And it wasn't until like 10 years later that they really understood it and saw where it was going. And it was pretty ballsy to follow the underground dance music scene back in the early 90s. And
do you remember your first gig?
First gig, actually, the first time I actually played out was at the Palace at the Experience Tour. I played before Paul Oaken. No, actually, no. It was actually after the Prodigy. I got myself onto that gig. I wasn't billed, but I managed to do it. So I actually did the set after the
good
Prodigy.
First gig.
Good first gig, yeah. The first official gig was The Meaning of Life, which was a Right on One productions party. Mark Hogan and Emmy. Right on One with the guys that did all the street raves. And they did Siberian, a few early parties in the early days, but street rave was their thing, and street rave was just insane.
The one in Brunswick?
We did 12 street raves. We do them. There was the Brunswick Street Festival and there was St Kilda Festival. And over the years, the ones in Brunswick Street were sort of on the sides, and and then that big year, which you see the footage, was right up the very, very end, Alexander Parade. I think there was 140,000 people there that day, and on the stage you could just see all the way up Brunswick Street. It was just a sea of fucking people. It was just insane.
That footage that you talk about, right? Mm-hmm. That has gone viral every single year for fucking last 10 years. There's one where you're playing in it. Can you run me through that gig?
Actually, I played at all of them, but the one that you see on Brunswick Street, it was strange, because the night before that I was in Ibiza and overseas, and I'd come back, and then on the Saturday night I played at the Every Picture Party, and it was quite ironic because 2 days before I was at Ibiza playing under a beach umbrella, right, and it was a sprinkler party, and was just trying to keep this dry, and then this Every Picture morning it was dripping from the roofs, and they had put up a beach umbrella above the decks. So it was just like I was in a beach umbrella in a rave cave. It was just insane. And then the following day was the street rave, and that one in particular was really cool. And I think part of the issue that actually stopped them from doing the street raves at the festivals was it just became too big. Like the street raves became a really massive part of it, which is a shame, because it was pretty cool. And that one in particular, I think Will played at it, Jace, Mark, and all those guys. And by the end of the day, it was just out of control. And but the most amazing thing about it was daytime, most of it, no lights, just sound. and all the punters would come past and just see all these people going, and just like, what's going on here? And just really it was very educational for people, and it was good for the scene as well.
It's almost wild to think that ever existed, because now if you went to a council and said, hey, do you mind if we do 100,000 person rave? The answer would be no fucking way. And you guys were doing it year on year and year, and they were free, right, too?
Well, that's it. You know, there was the Brunswick Street ones were always on Brunswick Street. The St Kilda ones were in quite a few different locations. We did Catani Gardens. We did the Sea Bars just before it opened, and that was just insane. That was when it was just a concrete shell. And it was just this massive warehouse. It was just insane. And then the other one where there's footage of is in between Luna Park and the Palace. That was pretty fucking cool as well. I think there was 5,500, 6,000 people at that particular block there, and they were just through the roof. The raw energy during the days, you know, it's just wild. And it's just pretty special. Yeah.
Was that the peak? Would you say was that like sort of the peak of that rave culture when those events were on?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the actual year. Look, I think the rave culture peaked at the 90s, and like I said, we were forced to go into the clubs towards the end of the 90s. But yeah, it was 92 to 96, I think, 97, 98 was when it was just every week there was just events on. And the thing was the promoters coordinated with each other. You know, they made sure they didn't clash in events because everyone wanted to go together, and it was a real big thing. Everyone would all just go in, to one particular place. So, yeah, it was pretty special. And I actually probably been wanting to do a movie for ages, and I wanted to call it The Nights of the Round Turntable, and I wanted to do have all the DJs and sort of and promoters from the early days in like a round table and talking about how everything actually developed and what actually happened. And so the thing is, some of the stories that we can tell, like you can't make them up. Like you just couldn't. And just to find out some of the things we got away with, with the wow, man. Like I won't go into too many of them now, but some of the things that we were doing was just like, wow, you couldn't do it today. But it was just insane. We had a license to do anything at these events, and it was out of control.
It's fucking wild. If I had a time machine, that's where I'd go back to. Like I watch those videos still sometimes now, and I'm like, I'm so shattered I missed them.
It was the golden era. One unfortunate thing was we didn't have the technology back then to record them. And there's, these days you get all the events that are beautifully video recorded and, cams and everything, and the audio is fantastic. There's not much footage from back then. So a lot of it is in your memory. So the people who were there remember a lot of it and have just such vivid experience of it. But like I said, it's really hard to recollect, a lot of it. But the music does that, and the music's amazing like that. It takes you back to a certain place and a feeling, and every single time it does, and that's the beauty of the music. But yeah, it's I've always been searching for people that anyone got any footage or anything like that, because there were a few dudes that had cameras going around, your digital cameras and that sort of thing. But no mobile phones that took photos back then, and nothing good anyway. So yeah, having it's tricky because that's what I said. It'd be good to capture it in a different way, now that it's history, and it is history. It's like, it's gone, that rave era, and it's a shame because it was definitely a golden era of music and entertainment parties. Yeah, just like I said, it's just hard to recall a lot of it unless you're actually there, and it's hard to explain and describe what actually went on to a lot of people that didn't experience it, so.
I actually had to be there.
A lot of it, you did have to be there. It's just insane. Like and one of the biggest things, you talk about the vibe and the energy, and just like every picture parties in particular were my favorite. Like just the energy that was put in it, the amount of people that would come together, the whole global village concept. And I remember like the Mud people I bugged them for gigs, like there was like the Bringers of the Dawn and all these things, and like I just knew there was something else going on at these events, and they're connected with the global thing, the whole anything, the consciousness thing, and they were on it from the start, and they sort of brought that culture from London over here. And without people like them, we just wouldn't have had it. So, every picture of Richard, John, and Hyde were just such a major part of my life and everything, giving me a go as well. Because it was hard to get gigs. And they were the ones that would end up giving me some big gigs and at the every pictures. And Willie was doing the main sets and, all the other DJs. And I got to do the last set for ages. And it sort of it became my thing, the morning set. Wouldn't want to go up against Willie. You just can't compete with Willie's just the king. King Willie, I call him. And the morning sets. So I was doing the morning sets, and I loved doing the morning sets, but it just meant anticipation and anxiety. And if you're not nervous, you're not taking it serious. And I used to take it very, very seriously. It wasn't just a game. And people's lives. There was a whole lot more behind the movement than just the drugs and the music. It was a real big global, peaceful consciousness shift, which I think we're finally getting into now. After all these years, people are finding the fifth dimension across the globe are waking the fuck up to what's actually going on. Social media has been a big part of that. But like I was saying, back then it was all was a different way of communication. It was all through vibe and energy, and just there was just something that we couldn't see, but it was there. It was really mysterious, but yeah, ended up working it out and discovered what it was, and yeah, it was and it was just inside me, and it still is. Like I'm passionate about it, and it's all I've done. Music is all I do, and even over the last 10 or 15 years, I haven't been involved in the scene. I've been just working out what's the right thing to do, and music production is what I wanted to do, and I've spent the last 7-8 years doing that. And all I do is just make music now. All my spare time is just all I'm doing. So
It's a crazy thing you talk about how it never leaves you, right? Because it doesn't. And that's like one of those things, like, I think probably maybe most music genres, but with dance, and it's now being realized that people from the 90s, the 2000s, the 10s, the 20s, we are coming together. Like, so it doesn't really matter. We all have the same lived experience, and this is 40-year community, and the music is somewhat the same. So the people are rocking to the same tunes from the 90s right now, like they've been made yesterday. And there's no other real genre that does that, right? That kind of talks to a generation of people so largely. This kind of connection piece and dance music now is almost 40 years strong in Melbourne, which is fucking insane. The thing you were talking about with the filming, 2016 is when I've worked out, is when cameras started to come along. Because I started doing stuff in 2004, and we basically had no footage, same. So I look back at like a lot of the stuff we did when we pioneered the Melbourne sound with the orchestrated boys, etc.
Yep.
We got no fucking footage, and I can't find it. I'm trying to find it, same as you did. People sometimes had handy cams, but it doesn't almost exist. And then 2016 there's heaps. So that seems to be the magic year that it becomes.
iPhone didn't come out until 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that whole rave culture was just about said and done by then, and so that I actually had to research that. When did the iPhone come out? And it said 2007. I went, what? Like, fuck, that was like way onto it. So that you can understand, why people didn't have the footage. I had a couple of guys that would come around with me, and they filmed a lot of the gigs, and a lot of that footage tapes got magnetized, and lost a few of them, and others went missing. But there's quite a few that I still have, but not all of them. And it's such a shame, because it'd be nice to be able to show some of the people what actually went on.
I think there's something special too, though, their memories. Like, you can talk about it, and there are going to be people watching this now, and they're going to go, fuck, I remember that. It's going to rush back. There might be a song that plays, like you said. I almost think that sometimes we're lucky that that is our experience. It's this, we've got this kind of thought process that brings us back to those times through sounds, like you said, not necessarily visuals, but at the same time, maybe we are the lucky ones, because we can't watch it back. So then our memories can never change, if that makes sense. So now we've gone really deep. We keep going through different rabbit holes. The base station era. So you begin base station, I believe, with your brother. Is that correct?
No. Base. I initially started by myself. I was in a band with my brother and Michelle Smith and a guy called Pete Morris called Magnetic in the 90s, and we were doing pub gigs, Evelyn. But we were a hybrid band. We'd mix in between tracks, guitar, everything was digital keyboards, and I'd be sort of mixing over the top of it and scratching, that sort of thing. And we were actually at a point where we were just about to make it. We were years ahead of our time, and we were signed with Polydor and doing these gigs. And then we supported Savage Garden at the Palace. And John Woodruff, their manager, just finished their world tour, and he was looking for another band or whatever to take around this international circuit, and especially the States, which he's cracked to do. So he wanted to take us over, and but he wanted our publishing. And Polydor wouldn't relinquish. Polydor Australia would let it go, but Polydor International wouldn't, because it was a unprecedented event. So we got shafted. We were on the borderline of just becoming something massive, and that's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And that sort of went past us, so we just let the band go. And Michelle went on to do Rent in Sydney. Brother went on to do his stuff with Steinberg and lots of stuff. And then I was sort of stuck in Melbourne going, well, what do I do? And I actually had been running, before base, we ran Escape. It was the first night I did at CBD, which was Sound of Now. And that went for about 12, 18 months, which was good. But I let that go and walked away from that for certain reasons, which political reasons. And I went back after the whole Magnetic thing had happened to CBD just to pick up some decor. And I just sort of thought, hey, only Friday night, there's not really anything on a Friday night. There was, I think it was Chinese Laundry at Dome. It was a bit of a crossover, but there was nothing else. And there was all these DJs that were buying records, and I'd see them all in the store. There were so many young guys and people that were just dedicating their lives to this and just not getting any work. And I said, fuck this, let's open this venue with 3 rooms. Let's put on 15, 20 DJs, rotate them, let's just give them all something to do and work. And that was the whole theory behind bass. And I think that week I had like $75 in my pocket, I think, that week. And I just went out, we got flyers done, we did teasers and whatever. And we had like 80 people through the door. It was mainly crew and those sort of people. Then the next week there was 350. The next week it was like 900. And then that was it. It was just bang, it was rammed every week. It just worked. And it was the whole bringing in all the different people, different DJs, giving them all a go, and they all had their crews, which were quite extensive, and it just worked, and that's how Bass Station just exploded. And we were at CBD for I think 2 years. And the issue we were having was when we started bringing internationals, everyone couldn't see them. Like honestly, the place was just fucking ran. Like you just couldn't get upstairs, and it was insane. And so that's when we decided to move Chasers. And at that particular time, it was Zoz, and Steve Olsen had just taken over Zoz, and that was a beautiful club. They'd renovated it, the sound and everything, which was just it was amazing. Chapel Street vibe wasn't too bad at that particular point in time. It was at a really good stage when Chapel Street was around. So that's when we took bass to Chasers. And I think that worked for us for really, for what we were trying to do, the big rooms and that sort of thing, multiple rooms so we could keep all the DJs on, kept rotating them. And then we do the birthdays and we had the back-to-backs. And I think it was like the 4th or 5th birthday, we'd had like 1,000 DJs through. We just had so many different sets, and and every birthday would just, add the amount that we'd come through. And I think that was part of the thing behind Bass Station was you got in on your merits. With me, you got a gig through persistency and dedication and determination. And I remember I was like, with Mark Jones, I kept bugging him for years for fucking gigs. And he goes, you shit me enough or I'll give you a fucking gig. You know what I mean? But Mark Jones was a big mentor for me. Like Mark is another person as well who gave me some really big gigs and some breaks. And I'll always be eternally grateful to Mark Jones as well. The opportunities that I've got from that. But like I said, it was, but with bass, and that was the thing. And I'd have all the DJs come in and the whole thing. And it was like like, people were saying, I want to play this set, that set. I said, look, just do your time, man. You get to go up through the ranks, and it did. And all the people that came through they knew that they were judged on their merits and on their skill and determination. And that was the whole thing with Bass Station. I wasn't judgmental of it. Some of the dudes would come along and they weren't, people would, slightly outcast people, so to speak, underdogs or whatever you want to call them. And mate, I'm non-judgmental. I will just, what do you got? You know what I mean? And always give people a go, because you just never know what someone's, hiding. And a lot of people, found their way through Bass Station and their life and themselves as well. So, it's good.
So you moved on to the Palace at some point?
We were at Chasers for 2 years, and then we moved to the Palace. Now, Palace, mate, it was funny because I was standing there with one of my mates, Smitty, at Chasers before we went to the Palace, and it was 10 years after I'd been there with him 10 years before, and on Friday Night Express, I said, it's been a decade, man, and we were running it. I was like, fuck, it's bizarre. And then to go to the Palace, which was where I mentioned before, to the first gig that I went to, which frightened the shit out of me, was just to go back there was just insane, because that was just, mate, it was such a premier venue. It was beautiful. It was beautiful, versatile, state of the art sound and lighting and everything. And then we had Mark Ballinger, Mark come in every week, and he just makes sure the lasers and everything was spectacular. When I smack the decor and everything, so it was just such a good venue, and a big venue, not too big, but big enough to handle when we had the big events. And then we could keep it quite intimate in the back room on weekly nights. And once again, it just worked. Being tucked away from sort of everywhere as well, like it was, that area. So sort of, Palace, that was amazing. We were there for quite a few years and had some crazy experiences there, and this is where the whole, the bass family and the culture and that sort of thing, it really was a culture. Like it was way much bigger than I was. We had 120, 30 promoters. And we really looked after our promoters and DJs and everyone. And we had incentives the whole time. They'd come on tours and that sort of thing. So they were just so into it. We had, they got hoodies, they got their cards and this and that, and they promoted. So they were the ones that really made it massive. And, at the meetings, I was always seeing what they wanted to do and what the culture was. And bass was driven by the people. It was not really my decision or anyone's decision. It was just pushing in a direction. It was just this thing that just organically just grew and developed, and people just came into it. So it was just amazing. It really was. And it was such a shame we lost it, in the end. But
so what's the story there? How did it end up?
Look, two stories. Like I've always had issues with people with trust and that sort of thing in the past, and I've worked with a lot of people, and had a fair bit of success and opened the doors for a lot of people as well. And money and power corrupts people. I saw people change. People become greedy, too egotistical. Want this, want that, want too much, and that sort of thing. And it was a real shame because bass was massive, and it was just in the end, like I walked from it because it was just too much greed and everything like that, and it's just not what I was about. The whole rave culture and everything. We were against commercialism and against society as it's set up, and that was the whole culture. And when it started fitting into that, it lost. I didn't lose control or anything like that. But as I said, it was its own thing. But I just didn't like the direction it was going. But then, the Palace, we were up for it was supposed to get knocked down, and there was issues with that where they were going to lose the venue, and that went into the courts and everything, and we were granted 10 years to stay there. And so bang, invested all in it again, and then bang, they pulled the plug on us again. So we lost the venue in the end anyway. So that was a big part of it, and that was a shame because looking back at it now, I didn't realize how important bass was in the whole, you know, um, in the whole scene and everything. And it was because we were doing the events with Mark James. He was doing the future things, and we handled the underground side of it. He handled the more commercial side of it. There was your bubbles, there was your candies. There was every night, PhDs. There was just everything was there. Then when bass stopped, it all started. It only took 12 months before all the other ones sort of ended, and it was interesting to watch. And I think was doing the Ministry Sound CDs, which once again a pretty big commercial brand. But when I was approached to do that in 2000, was just after I got back from overseas. Thanks to Matt Crawford as well, and the guys at Kiss for giving me the vote for that. And I was the first and only Ministry Sound DJ ever to choose my own music. With all the Ministry compilations, a lot of them were done digitally by producers, and then the DJs had to select from the Ministry Sound catalogue. And Ministry Sound Australia, because this is important. My success and the base station success, like the Ministry Sound was important. I remember the Ministry Sound Australia started, and they'd done a clubber's guide, and then they did one of the other ones, and they hadn't really worked, and they really had to make something work. And I said, I got approached with these guys and got called for a meeting in Melbourne. And it was on a Sunday morning. The guys were down here, and I missed the meeting. I'm like, oh, fucking hell. Like, are you kidding? I got on a plane the next day and went up to Sydney to chase them up. Anyway, so scored the deal. And, they said, what music do you want? And I pulled out, like I said, I've just got back from London and Ibiza and Germany. And it was 2000. I went to La Parade in 2000, speaking of brilliant. 1.4 million people. Never seen anything like it, mate. And speaking about the love and the peacing, there was one incident at that event, 1.4 million people. So it goes to say, with the drugs and the culture and non-alcohol and peace movement, it was definitely big. Anyway, I was very lucky in a sense where I went out. When I went to London, I went to buy records, and I went to buy I wanted to buy trance, and there was no trance anywhere, like nowhere. And I'm thinking, who's this fucking idiot? I'm like, and they kept saying hard house, hard house. And to me, hard house was more like the hardest type of house, like Casey and these guys were sort of playing, like Quinny and those sort of guys, and you know what I mean? Whereas house was more handbag house, but that sort of thing, and the clubby house, and more vocally stuff. And then it wasn't until I went out to Escape from Samsara at the Fridge in Brixton that night, and I rocked up, and it was just like 9 o'clock. It was already 100. It was so fast, and I've gone to look at who was playing. It was Oberon. He'd already had it on +3. It was like 145 beats per minute. At like 9 o'clock at opening, I'm like, where the fuck are they going to go with this? What is this? By 2 or 3 o'clock, man, I'm sitting inside the speaker going, oh, just bang, 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 bang. Oh, what the fuck? The next 2 days, I went to all the record stores, the Tidy Tracks, everywhere, and I spent €6,000 or pounds on tunes. There's all these fucking records, and they gave me all these white labels and all these records. I didn't know what they were at the time, and then but I just had this. I just had to hear it. I've gone to La Parade, which was fantastic, and then we went to Ibiza, and Ibiza, I just couldn't hear anything hard. It was just, bring it back, sing it back, and I'm like, I put in this music, and we tried to get a set of decks to play these tunes, and couldn't get them anywhere. I was offering people crazy amount of money to borrow decks for the night, just couldn't get them. Anyway, come back home, and it was like, as I was saying before, and the tunes, and it was the Every Picture and Street Rave, and the tracks I had with Generator, The Music Is Moving, Hellfire, Where Are You Now, all that hard house stuff, man, and they just gave me the bombs, and I was really, really fortunate in that sense. And these are the tunes that I approached Central Station with.
Ministry Sound, yeah.
Sound with, yeah. And I'm just thinking, they're not going to know half of them, and I think I put in maybe 35, 40 tracks for licensing. Out of that, I think about 24 came back. Some of the ones that I was surprised that we got cleared, and then I went to do the demos, and there'd never been anything like that on Ministry Sound before. It was hard, and I started off at 142, 3 beats a minute, and it ended up at 155. So it was just a banging fucking hard fucking CD. And they weren't sure how it was going to go. Anyway, that came out, and the first week it sold like 9,000 copies, which was pretty big back then. And then it just charted, and that just became a massive, massive success. And I think that was also really important and pivotal in the whole scene in Melbourne and Australia, across Australia in particular, and bass as well. Like everything sort of combined into one sort of big thing. And then of course with the bass CDs and Sound of Now, we were licensing the first one was the Underground Movement, Underground Sounds, me and Carlos, and that was Bass Station through Sound of Now Records, through Ministry Sound, through EMI. So we were lucky in a sense where I got to utilise the commercial things that were all set up there to develop our underground brands. Um, and it got the music out there. You know, getting back to what we were saying before with the Impress and all those sort of things, and you know, the dance music back in the 90s, a lot of people saw it as, you know, like really cheesy, Betty Boo, all of that sort of stuff. And the stuff they're playing on the radios was just fucking crap. And a lot of it is still fucking crap today. It's just, I don't know where these fucking rock stars come from, or the pop stars, Illuminati, or whatever the fuck it is. But, you know, it's just, it was all processed stuff. And I just didn't go, it's just fuck. So a lot of the cons and the things that I was trying to express was, this is not the music you hear on your radios. It's not, dance music is not the commercial crap that you fucking hearing, you know, or DJ Bobo, all that sort of crap. It's different. It's serious fucking music. And that was, you know, that's where, like I said, a lot of it with Impress, and that became really important. And it was because we didn't have the social media and all that sort of back then. It was, a lot of it was still like word of mouth. And like I said, this is the culture and the family that that isn't there today as such. You know, it was a real close knit society where everyone knew everyone, everyone got along. If you didn't, you weren't sort of allowed to come. And that was the whole thing with Bass Station. That's why it was so special. You know, in the 10 years that I ran bass, we had one fight, like one blue, which was at CBD. Apart from that, we had no fucking trouble, you know, nothing inside the venue. And that was what I wanted, and that was the beauty of it. And that was one of the big things behind that movement as well, was just the whole piecing and the music. And you just knew you could go somewhere, be yourself, be safe, and just have a good time.
And there's so many people in Melbourne that thank you for those nights, no doubt. So you talked about before that when Bass Station fell over, then a whole bunch, that basically that whole scene fell over. The pharmacy stuff, PhD, Hard Candy, all the brands that people remember and loved back in those days. Why do you think that scene just disappeared? Like, I know all scenes do it,
Yep.
but why do you think specifically that scene fell over?
There's a few reasons. I think, look, the global economic crisis, whatever it was that happened back then, you know, people lost their indispensable, you know, cash flow income. So it sort of stopped people going out and having that extra money to splurge. There was, the government implemented the 2 a.m. lockdown at some stage as well, which I think actually caused more problems. People were getting locked outside of clubs, and that was, you know, initiating violence again. People walked outside of clubs, and that sort of wasn't working. And also the no smoking thing had a really big effect on, you know, people going to clubs, in and out of clubs. So there's all these new regulations came into play. That, and I think the music as well, and I guess the drugs have affected it a lot. I think over the years, music's got faster as the drugs got changed. You know, a lot less MDMA. You know, it was a lot slower back then, and then I think speed became into it and all that sort of thing, and it became really fast. And I think a lot of people couldn't associate with the speed of the music at the particular point in time. It was just too quick, and you just really need to be fucked, you know, and it was just too noisy. So I think the music lost a lot of its soul. Like when we're talking about the early rave stuff, the classics, it's just, I don't understand how a lot of these artists did it back then. Like the tracks that were just written, Old Leaves and these guys, Cosmic Babies and you see Jason, the music is just insane. Like they were just special people making special sounds, you know. And I think a lot of it lost its edge. You know, it went through this really, you know, I love him. I mean, remember him, friend, whatever. But you know, his music he was just such an awesome DJ. But then he just took it. I felt the state of trance stuff just too cheesy and too formalized, and it was just like there was no hard trance and no really good solid underground shit, you know. And I think that's where a lot of it lost its vibe. And I think also people were maybe confused between, not necessarily choice, but people, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like I said, those particular reasons were quite a few of it, and it was at the end of a golden age and era. And a lot of us ravers had got a bit older, and a lot of people started having families, kids, getting back to their life. You know, can't keep partying anymore. So there's a lot of reasons why. Also, the government implementing things, the laws, you know, doing events, that sort of thing, loss of freedom in the clubs. So there was a lot of reasons why it happened. Yeah.
So one thing that I would love to bring up is because I speak to a lot of people who were a little bit older than me, and they talk about that scene, and they have the same memories you do when it was like love, peace, everyone hugging. And a lot of what they say at the end is that it wasn't like that anymore. It became a little bit darker. There was an underbelly, an undertow. The drugs were sort of fueling, like you said, different drugs were coming in. Did you have that experience, or can you talk on that?
Yeah, look, definitely. I think the two types of scenes. There was the underground rave scene, and then there was the club scene as such. You know, the club scene, more your Evos and your Vipers and all that sort of thing. A bit more gangster orientated, glam, that sort of thing. Whereas us ravers were underground, you know, trackies and Geordie, whatever, a bit more grubby and dirty, that sort of thing, just more street level. It was when they started to intertwine as well, became an issue. I was doing bass on Friday at Chasers, and then Sunday night across the road was doing Sunday night at Viper Room, which was awesome, but it had that element in it. You know, and there was one night where just, you know, I got bailed up in the dunnies, you know, what do you got, getting rolled in the toilets and all this stuff. I'm like, fuck, this is just not what I want. This is not how I want it to be. And I think that was where a lot of, like, it started, like I said, it became massive. And then these dance parties were not just ravers; they were a mixture of stuff, and it just lost a little bit of its beauty, I think, and its balance just by the wrong element going there. Not just maybe the wrong element going there. It took a lot of it away. And then there was a lot of confusion as to what events were. You'd have your club events, and there'd just be a mixture of people, and ravers would rock up in the rave shit, and there'd be chicks slammed out and all sorts of things. It's just like, it became really quite confusing because it became so big. But then again, like the events at Melbourne Park, your Two Tribes and your Slinkies and your God's Kitchen, I mean, those things were just like fucking amazing. I remember the first time I walked into Melbourne Park for the first Two Tribes, I'd never seen anything like it, man. Walked into that Rod Labour and I just at the stop and just looked across the venue and went, this joint is fucking purpose built for these events. That's off to Mark and Richie for doing that. But and then so that was a special time and the golden era. These parties were just fucking huge, and people that went to them would understand what I'm talking about. And a lot of that was before all the drug testing on the road became into it as well. Like everyone, this is the thing. Like people were driving around and going to events and on the road, and I think a lot of people were more attentive on the road if they were influenced rather than not. But the police were setting up their buses at the entrances and exits, so people weren't allowed to. It was affecting getting to events in a lot of ways and making it difficult for people. And it was a big deterrent. With your Kroll Castle and all those ones, like every single car that went past got searched and checked and whatever, and it delayed things, and people just didn't really want that hassle. I think so. That was a big deterrent as well.
That's so true. I've never thought about that. That's 100% true. Like, because obviously you've kind of alluded to it, but everyone was driving around off their heads. Is that good or bad? I don't know, but that's what happened. But it massively had an effect. There was all these outer skirt parties. There was Kroll Castle, all these massive iconic raves that people talk about to this day. And they're like, why can't they happen? And the reason why they can't happen is because people can't drive around off their heads, which is probably a good thing. But at the same time, it definitely had a major effect on the culture, 100%. And I guess the other thing too was before the festival wars, promoters were still working together. And then you talked about that commercialization and regulation. There's this thing that continues to come up as we continue to talk. There's commercialization, but it's not just the government and the people who are running these events at licensed venues. The other part was the drugs and stuff that came in and the gangsters that came. That was commercialization too. Because they were coming in because there was money, because ravers were taking drugs. So you had commercialization from the underworld, and you also had commercialization from the actual government. And then you had regulation because it was getting so big, because it was becoming so commercial that people were saying, we need to regulate this because it's now, everyone's talking about it. It went from underground to not underground. So there's been this battle, and it's continuous no matter what time of or era you talk about. The underground has always battled with commercialization and regulation. And those things you're talking about and the changes are the same thing that happened to my scene, the scene that's going to happen after this, and it's going to continue, especially when it comes to dance music.
I think another thing was with that period of time when the gold, I guess maybe sort of 2007, 8, 9, 10, when it tapered off for a while there. I think that the younger generations that came through weren't into the dance music and the clubs and partying and that sort of thing. Whereas when bass was at its peak and Kiss was at its peak, I knew that throughout 20, 25 years, their younger brothers were at home listening to stuff on the radio, listening to the music, wanting to be DJs, wanting to be artists and that sort of thing, just waiting for their turn to get to 18 till they can go out. Unfortunately, when they got to 18 at that particular point in time, these events and clubs were not happening. And one of my big drives back then was why I wanted to try and get Dance Music Australia, which I'm doing now, happening again, was just to give a platform and work for people. Because Melbourne was, like I said, the nightclub capital of the world. There was band venues everywhere. They basically shut down one by one by one by one, Everland, everywhere. And then there was just the SB. Then the SB was gone. There was nowhere for people to play, like bands to play. And this is a big thing. I was speaking to Phil, hi Phil, about, what actually happened to the music scene in particular. And I think the Voice and Idol created, of course, a lot of damage. These big things were happening. All record company music over and over again, cover versions, songs, instant pop stars. And out of all those pop stars, they had no real fan base. I think your Guy Sebastians, there's only one or two of them that really succeeded in continuing with careers. But the majority of them, it's just like, bang, they don't have that fan base and the people that follow them. Whereas a lot of the DJs from the early days and that we did have that fan base, and you worked hard to achieve that, and that gave you the longevity. But then getting back to the whole venue thing, like I said, the venues were another issue. It became harder and harder to get venues and for bands and everything, and it affected the whole industry on a whole, The other thing that really affected it was the introduction of downloading stuff online and MP3s. I've been going to gigs and this person say, "You've got this track, that track," and I'm like, huh? Which track? You know what I mean? And it got to a point as well where people were choosing their own music, and there was a while where when it was on vinyl, you had to go out to the clubs to hear the DJs play it because there was 4 or 5 copies coming into the country, and if you want to hear these tunes, you just had to go out and you hear them. And if you want to hear them again, you had to go out the next week, and that was a lot of the beauty of it. Whereas the accessibility of digital music changed a lot of that, your iPods and all that sort of thing. And that's where a lot of the car park culture came into it, I think, where people were playing their own tunes in the car. You know, they'd rock up to venues and then they'd bang blast their stereos, and it even got to a point where they weren't even bothering coming out anymore because they had all the tunes at home, stereos at home, whatever it was. So that was another thing that affected the scene as well.
And nightclubs. Like, I remember having nightclubs and we were like, fuck, car park's full, but there's no one here. And we had to like do no pass outs and all this sort of stuff to try to keep people from hanging out in car parks, which is a wild thing to say, but that was the culture in Melbourne for a long, long time.
Yeah, well, I mean, you brought up the car park culture thing, and bass was a big one for that, you know.
There's a lot of undercovers in that car park. I remember.
Look, it's funny, man. Like I can say this, but because coppers, you know, the hot dog vans and all those things owned by the police, so they would have they stored their vans during the week. So we had a bit of a deal with the coppers. You know, if they were coming to do something, then we'd get the heads up and that sort of thing. And so if I got the heads up, I'd be out in the car park and, everyone, guys, cops on the way, no. Everyone just, everything would just go away. But it wasn't until there was these two articles that were quite damaging and really brought things to life. There was the two tribes, there was the 40 overdoses on G, which is not a good thing, but that was on the front page of The Age, and there was 5 photos, and in 3 of the photos, they were wearing Sound Now and bass stuff. There was just bass Sound Now. I'm just like, oh, fuck. The following week was the big bass station East, and that's when they did the article on the car park, and they were talking about, it was quite detailed about what they saw, this, that, you know, the car park culture. It was like being at McDonald's, you know, fast here, you know, people doing this, that, which put a sort of, you know, drug thing on Melbourne, but it was also one of the best advertisements we ever got. Everyone knew where to go to get it. You know what I mean? So, but you know, we had to be really careful at that stage, and that was at a point where we're now getting a lot of media attention, too much media attention, and that's my brands and my logos, and I'm getting pinned for that. So that had a little bit of, you know, an effect of me as well, and I sort of had to tap my moral compass as well. I'm thinking, what am I doing here? Like, am I, you know, am I providing at the right venue, the right thing here, or is it really become, you know, sensationalized and too much that focus? Again, so look, that was another questioning thing. And when you start questioning yourself, things just sort of.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, because we talk about 2 different timelines, but I had the same things, you know, like where I was like, I remember having a rave one time we shut down a part of Burke Street. And we had like, fuck, I don't know, 10 overdoses. And I remember making a joke about, at least I don't have to pay for lighting because there was all the ambulances at the front. I know, horrible joke. But at the time, I'm like, okay, the fact that I'm making that joke means I'm desensitized to it. Yeah. And then second to that, am I still providing what I started for, which was, you know, like their love of music and love of culture and love of events? Or for me, it goes back to commercialization. Am I doing this for money, and am I providing a safe place for drug people, or am I providing a place for people to do drugs? You know, so I myself sort of stepped away from it, same as you did. And the reason why I did was because I was like, those questions I couldn't answer anymore. Even violence, man, I'd watch people fight, and it was like entertainment to me. I'd be like, oh, I remember saying to one of the guards once, oh, don't break it up. And I was like, fuck, why am I saying that? But because I wanted to watch it because I was bored, you know? Like, and then at that point, I'm like, I'm not aiding. I'm sorry, I'm not helping. I'm basically like doing the opposite of that. Yep. So last question, because we've actually come up to an hour. I reckon I'm definitely going to have you back on, but we could talk for fucking 3 hours. And a lot of these things I can see it's just going down rabbit holes. But you're reflecting back on those old days and the new days. You're still playing out and about often when there's reunion gigs or whatnot. What's your sort of take on the current scene and the way it looks, reflecting on the decades that you've had experience in?
Well, this is the thing I was going to touch on before with the younger generations getting into the music scene, that sort of thing. And I think now there's a whole new generation again. You know, there was the Melbourne Bouncing did massive things for the culture across the globe. You know, hats off to those guys as well for doing groundbreaking stuff. But I think the reunions and all that sort of thing, it's been just about done to death. You know, I was going to do another bass and that sort of thing, and a few guys, I'm sick and tired of playing old stuff. And I said, look, so am I. It's really, really time to do the new shit now. You know, if I come out and start doing events again, it'll be new stuff. And that's what all the production stuff I've been doing. A lot of the stuff that I've released so far has been stuff that I've been making over the years, last 8 or 9 years. But now there's a whole of really current upfront stuff. And that's what I really want to start pushing. And I always thought that the whole Melbourne dance music scene was, I think, around about the 2000s there, we were at the forefront of the globe. You know, we were really an innovative bunch. And, you know, like when you've got the biggest international artists in the world playing in your stage like Chester and these guys, you know you're doing something. And all these dudes were coming from all over the globe. Melbourne was just recognised. And I've always said this, said it was one stage, it was the dance capital of the world. And
Techno City is what people used to call it.
And I remember saying, well, mate, that makes you king of the world because you're the techno guy. And to Mark James, well, he was voted the most influential man in dance music at one particular point in time in Mixmag, and that sort of made him the king of the world. So, you know, we had it going on here. And one of the biggest issues that I found that there was no artists releasing music, and there was a lot of good talented dudes, and they ended up giving up. And we were more a DJ focused and highlighted culture. Whereas across the globe, it was a lot of the producers, and the producers that were coming out here weren't cutting it as far as DJs were going. It was like, oh. So what I really wanted to do back then was really push the Australian artist thing, and that's sort of what I want to try and do again and revitalize that. More of the underground sort of stuff. I think there's a bit of confusion as to what's the global sound at the moment. What trance is? There's not much trance. Trance is cheese. There's the techno stuff, the peak time. I think techno is a really big thing and always will be. And that's sort of more the direction I want to continue to go down, like the techno direction. But the harder stuff, I think a lot of people like the acid techno from back in the day, not too much minimal. Minimal stuff's being fucking awesome, Boris and these guys, whatever. And then the hard techno is just really now coming into its niche. You've got your peak time stuff, which is about 135, which is still hard, banging. And then you've got your stuff which is 150, which is just insane. All the Sydney Noir guys and these guys are playing. And I really quite like them both. And I think trying to find something new is just what I'm trying to do. Collaborations with some of these new guys and talented artists and the guys that have been around, the Melbourne Bounce guys and those sort of things, and try to develop a new Melbourne sound that's a bit more international and sort of try and get back into the forefront and the innovative sort of sound across the globe. And I think that's where Melbourne's at now. And I think it's the talent's there, the technology's there, the people are there, and I think it's the scene's in a good place. It's cleaned up a lot. Good younger generations coming through, and people with their head in the right space. It's not just about partying, that sort of thing. They're there for the music, and that's what they want to hear, and that's the drive behind it, and that's why I'm getting back into it now.
Man, I love that, because like one of the things that I've sort of did when I started my whole talking out loud, right? The reason why I did that was because I felt like COVID, there was this gap, like this disconnect for the generation. So we would look up to guys like yourself, and when we were running the stuff in the Melbourne Bounce era, then the guys who were moving on to the next genre of music, they were looking up to us, and we kind of elders were teaching us how to do things. Guys, some of the names you've mentioned today, right, from Mark James to Richie Rich, et cetera, the people that I work with still to this day, they were taught by them, and names continue to come up and they continue to intertwine through every single podcast I do. The younger generation, they don't seem to know. And my thought process is like, well, you're going to make mistakes that we could probably help you avoid. But Melbourne, you talk about Melbourne sound, and the Melbourne sound has changed multiple times, from the guys from Wet Music to you guys to the Melbourne Bounce. We've always had a sound in Melbourne. There's guys out there right now who are killing it, but they're not necessarily connected or communicating with the elders in a sense, because I believe of that 2-year gap in music. So I'm trying to bridge that gap back together. So I'm talking to the younger kids, doing whatever I possibly can do, and then talking to you older heads that I respect, or ones in my scene and industry that I know should have respect, and trying to put it together, fuse that back together, because I think that once we do that, we can and we will become the top of the fucking food chain again.
Well, that's why Dance Music Australia. I've started the label and coming out with Dance Music Australia. Like it's going to be wide open. And once again, I'm looking for artists and people with new innovative stuff. To come in to do collabs. And I'll give anyone a crack that's got something good. And so that's a big drive as well. I think there's been not many labels sort of happening out of Australia, and with the whole change in the record industry, where there's record companies aren't running shit anymore, which is sort of a good thing, because a lot of them were corrupt and doing the wrong thing. Hollywood and all that sort of shit that's going on, which a lot of people know about now. And we're here to put an end to that. And but I think the whole promotion and I'm just finding my way around the industry now, and promoting through your platforms and different all these sort of things. It's a different ball game these days.
Ever evolving too. Every day it changes.
Well, this is it. And now I'm looking for people to help come on board and help me with the infrastructure and setting up the all the promotional stuff, all the online stuff. It's a big task, and I've been trying to do it by myself. But making music's a fucking full-time job, and now I'm doing all this other stuff, and it's just slightly overwhelming. So I'm putting a position up actually in LinkedIn today. I'm looking for people to come and work with me, but it's a certain mindset that's required to be involved, which is being part of base. It's not just there's the music, but there's also a philosophy behind it. It's about like what's going on the planet, the fifth density dimension, through Atlas, whether it's real or not, Project Bluebeam, the 2030 agenda, globalization, or the Health Organization. There's so many issues that are going on across the globe. It's such a volatile place at the moment. It could go either way, and Great Reset, all these particular things. So it's a label based, and I want it to continue in the whole theme and vibe behind the whole movement and where it came from. Communication, the whole global thing, the race, consciousness. One of the first parties I did was a Critical Mass, which was all about that, and the Celestine Prophecy, if any of you know about that. And that was back in 92 or 3. And it's now 20 X amount of years later, and I think it's actually just getting to that point now where that critical match is being released, getting realised, and humanity's waking up. And another thing is I found that things happen in cycles, especially with like 10-year cycles with this dance music industry. And I think it was sort of 96, 2006. And I think this year now with it again, I think it's a whole reset. And
Totally.
I believe and I'm pretty sure that some pretty crazy new stuff's going to come out, and it needs to. It needs to.
I love it. Jason, thank you so much for
worries,
giving
thank
me
you
an
for having me.
hour of your time. It's been something that I could not wait to do, and it's literally lived up to my expectation.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for being a part of this Melbourne industry that I love so much and you love so much, and paving the way for people now coming through now, but people that have come through already since, throughout the time. But second to that, just being so passionate, because like people need to see the passion behind these names that they've watched and they've danced on those dance floors, and that's what we're trying to highlight, and you've no doubt got it. So thank you so much for sitting down with me.
No worries, man. Thank you. And like just with that, you've got to have the passion, mate, because it's a lot of people try to kick you down and push you down, and it's there's been some absolutely amazing times, but there's been some pretty down times as well. But
And you got to be a little bit crazy.
I have to be a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't have enough. You can never have enough self irony. I always say you can't take yourself too seriously. You've got to be able to laugh at yourself. And I'm my harshest critic by far. Like I've never criticized anyone down more so than I put myself down. And but in the same regard, it's nice to get a bit of a pat on the back. Thank you for and it's nice to get some recognition here and there. And like I said, but it's a lot of it is hard work, but it's the passionate ones that stick it out and get there in the end.
My most excited part about this is when you get to see the feedback of how many people are going to come out to you and talk about how much you've changed their life or you've had an impact in their life. And I can't wait for you to see that because you definitely deserve it.
Well, look, I've had a few people come up to me a couple of times and say things like, like pretty serious things where, like they were going to go home and make themselves, they'd had enough. And then just a lot of these morning sets in particular, but they said, you just kept me there, man. You just kept me there. And I was like, I'd play from the heart, and I knew what I was doing on the dance floor. I spent the time on the dance floor, and I knew what the music was doing. And I would always put my heart and everything into it. And you could feel that. And
You can tell.
And that's it was a serious business, and this is the thing, like, Mark James used to put me on at the end of these events because that sets whether people come back or not, and it's a big thing how something ends as to how people feel, and especially when we talk about the drugs and you're going home, coming down, that sort of thing. If you leave on a not so good note, it's a lot of people come into the scene because they're lost, finding themselves. The dance floor is the place where you find yourself. You discover yourself through movement and the music and all that sort of thing, that's the serious side behind it all. There's a real serious element. That's why I do take it very seriously. I never took any of the gigs that I got for granted, and I never. I said I'm always nervous and always anxiety, but it was, like I said, if you're not nervous, you're not serious about it. So
The best.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, man.
No worries, man. Thank you.
Bye.